Welcome back to part 2 of I Catch Killers with our guest, Peter Seymour. Peter's a retired detective, and if you've been listening to part 1 of I Catch Killers with Peter, he's been talking about a murder investigation. It's a fascinating investigation. 2 ladies, one had disappeared and one died in suspicious circumstances. They were both married to the same man. We're just, if you left part 1, talking about the discovery of 7 bones under the house of the home that this lady, Jean, disappeared from. So, Peter, let's take it from there.
Yeah, so the investigation rolled on. We got the 7 bones. The DNA techniques in Australia weren't sufficient at that time to get the results that we needed from the extractions. And because they're all small bones, we didn't have too many shots at it. Because the bones would actually end up being destroyed. So we were told to take them to the Department of Defense in America. There were a few things that we had to tidy up in the investigation, try and locate the console operator from the service station where Jean had, where they'd pulled in when Tom had brought her back from the caravan park and she got away from him. She actually said she needed to go to the toilet and jumped out the bathroom window and took off down the road.
Right.
So there were those few things. Now, at that time, being in a really busy police station at Mount Druitt, we had a lot of investigations running, and we had a new boss who said, look, we really need to get the homicide involved to finalise these follow-ups and get it done. And the homicide squad were always there from the beginning to provide advice and assistance if and when we needed it. So they were called in.
I think we'll explain that because I think people, so they understand the workings of the New South Wales Police with homicide and local detectives. You're working at the local detectives,
yes,
running the investigation. Homicide would turn up back in those days and turn up as an on-call and perhaps oversee the investigation. And people often get confused. Is it only homicide detectives that investigate homicide? It's certainly not. Local area detectives carry a great weight with the amount of homicides they investigate. And what actually happens, and again, just explain so people understand where we're taking the story to, what actually happens is that homicide will come out, we'll speak to the local detectives. Depending on the amount of resources the local detectives have or the nature of the crime, how difficult it might be or how complex it might be, a determination will be whether it's going to be a homicide-led investigation or a local area command or local detectives leading the investigation. Back then with these particular investigations, it was a situation that homicide have said, you guys have got the lead, but you can consult with us if need be. But as the investigation drew bigger and bigger, I would imagine the competing interests with the local area command, your bosses going, well, you got homicide there, maybe we need to bring homicide in. Is that how it happened?
That's exactly right. Admittedly, like we'd spent so many years and so much time investigating it. It's like taking your baby away from you, I guess, in a way. But realistically, the demands of the station, the local area command at the time, the homicide squad got brought in to finalise these follow-up matters. And to be honest, some of these matters took us well out of our command.
Yeah.
So the boss said, look, I really can't spare you at this point in time to go doing that. And the homicide guys came in. They were briefed on the investigation all the way through anyway. So they knew about it and we gave them all the information that we had. And it wasn't long after that I got transferred up to Penrith Command to run a new investigators course. So I moved from Mount Druitt up to Penrith at that time.
Yeah. And reading in your book, it was something that you were pretty angry about at the time. And I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I think you've given a very balanced and fair account of it, that, it was distracting you from other stuff that you needed to do at the local area command. But it is hard for a detective to let a case go.
Especially one that you've invested so much time and it's impacted your life the way this one had. It's very hard to let it go. So when I was first told that the homicide guys were going to be brought in and finish it off. Yeah, I was pretty miffed about it at that point. But in hindsight, it was the right call to make. And the other thing too, I knew the homicide detectives that they were bringing in to take over. Terrific guys. I'd known one of them, Rod Damer, for many years.
Yeah, he'd been around for a long time.
Yeah, and I got on really well with Rod. And Rod knew, like, he'd worked at a local level as well, so he knew how I'd be feeling.
Okay, so if the boss just said, "Oh, don't worry," like, it couldn't care less about taking it off you, the fact that they knew that you'd be upset and expected that. But then when Homicide came out, like, I know from a homicide detective's point of view, and I've been the local area command detective, and I've also been the homicide detective. And you don't want that arrogant homicide detective rolling up and go, "Here, give it here, I'll take it from here." So the fact that you knew the bloke from Homicide would have made a big difference.
Oh, it did. And as Rod said, he said, "Mate, this is your investigation. We'll finish it off, but I'll keep you updated on everything we're doing." And that was the comfort to me. I knew it was in really good hands, and Rod and his offside and Neil Tuckerman, they kept me appraised of everything that was going on, so that I was always kept in the loop.
So you're off running the investigators course, which is a course for potential detectives or upskilling investigative skills.
That's correct.
And watching what was going on with your investigation.
That's right.
What happened with the bones? Because the breakthrough of the investigation for the murder of Jean would be, I would imagine, when the bones were positively identified as Jean's bones.
That's right.
But there was a delay.
Yeah, there was. All the peripheral matters that had to be tidied up and marked off were done. In the meantime, I'd left the detectives. I'd run this course up at Penrith and decided to give my family a bit of a break from the life that I led as a detective, being called in of a night time and working weekends. So I ended up deciding to become a police prosecutor and doing a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job and spend more time at home. Ultimately, after a couple of years, in 94, I became a prosecutor at the Westmead Coroner's Court. So it was sort of a natural progression for me to end up in that court arena where I could also keep an eye on what was happening with the Kear case.
And because part of the role at the Coroner's Court, we're looking at unsolved homicides or missing persons and different things. You came across this case and you spoke to the coroner about it, or the coroner spoke to you about it?
Yes, we had a new coroner take over. Mr. Hyatt was the senior deputy state coroner there initially when I arrived there in 94, and he retired. And a couple of years later, a new coroner by the name of Jan Stevenson ended up taking over. There were a couple of people filling in the meantime. And she had a particular interest in unsolved murders, and we had at Westmead in our area, we had about 7 or 8 on the board at that stage. And she asked me about them, and I said, well, I can tell you about one in particular. And
that was handy, the fact that you were there.
Yes. Yep. It's funny how things work out. So we sat down in her chambers one day, and I went right through it. And she said, well, where are the bones? I said, they're still being stored. They haven't ended up going over to America yet. She said, why not? And I said, I can't tell you for sure whether it's a cost thing or whatever. I don't know. And she said, well, get in touch with the homicide squad. I want them out here to tell me what's going on with them. And she said, and she was fantastic. She was a great coroner. She said, actually, don't tell them I want to know what's going on. I want them to tell me when they're going to America. Because at that stage, it's still a coroner's matter. Yeah. Even though the police do the investigation, they do it on behalf of the coroner.
Yeah.
And so she can call the shots in effect on a number of things. So I made the call to the homicide squad. They came out for a meeting with the coroner, and she was very firm, but it was a really good meeting, and she said, I want them taken to America. So they were. And
I love the subtlety of your description here, because your book gives a little bit more depth. They're basically bounced by the coroner.
They were. Look, it was like, I suppose the analogy is like kids coming to the headmaster and the headmaster saying, listen, pull your head in, this is what I want done.
So after that very tactful meeting, surprise, surprise, the bones went to America?
They went to America, and a trade-off, I believe, was that when Rod Damon took them over to America, he gave the Americans an overview of the investigation, which they found obviously very interesting. But two types of DNA testing were done by the Department of Defence by two different scientists, and they came to the conclusion that the bones were from a child of the biological parents.
Okay, so you've got that, or the homicide have got that. What do they do then?
That was the final piece of evidence we needed.
Okay.
With that result, they then brought Thomas Kear in and charged him with Jean's murder.
And breaking it down and looking at the evidence that you've got there, you've got him saying that the wife had just left and Jean would contact him and other misinformation that they reported. But the evidence, the sheer weight of the evidence, the fact that the bones were buried under the house, the marital home, and you've also got the evidence from the prison informant. That's
correct. And look, there were other things too. There were evidence from family friends who had been over to the house on one occasion watching a movie. It was a crime movie, and apparently Thomas Kear made the comment that if Jean ever left him, he'd cut her up and feed her to the dogs. And that police are stupid because the only way they really solve things is if people open their mouths. Yeah. And the irony of that comment is that ultimately led to his conviction because he opened his mouth.
Search. Yeah. There was other, when it started to dig deeper into the investigation, there was other information that came that there was a smell coming from the house and yes. A dog coming back with bits and pieces. Talk us through that.
Yeah, that was a fairly critical piece of information too, because when Tom left to go to the Philippines to marry Rosalina, he had a lady and her young son rent the home. He brought Rosalina back after they got married and they moved into Tom's parents' place. And then the lady complained to Tom about a terrible smell coming from somewhere under the house. And she had her tenancy quickly terminated by Tom. He got rid of her. And then he did the place up a little bit. And that's where some further information from a colleague of Tom's turned up one day unannounced and saw Tom in the hallway of his house with the floorboards up and dirt on the floor, and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And he's basically said, "Oh, there's a bad smell. It's like something's dead under here. I'm going to get rid of it."
Right.
And so this bloke just said, "Oh, you're weird," and left him to it. So when you add all those things up,
it sort of paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. And when we interviewed the lady who was renting his house, she went a bit further and said that her dog would sometimes come out from under the house. She said on a couple of occasions had clumps of hairs. She said it's like you pull a clump of hair out of a lady's hairbrush that's built up over a period of time and you clean it. She said it was really strange. She said, I never thought anything of it at the time. But then the smell, and he then said, suddenly you got to leave.
It's painting a pretty clear picture, isn't it?
Well, to me, and the Crown prosecutor asked me, he said, look, why do you think we've only got these small bones, 7 of them?
Yeah.
Where's the rest of it? And I said, well, the only thing I can think of is he couldn't bring Rosalina back to the house until he got rid of the body. Because if he brings her back after he removes the tenants and Rosalina starts to get a bit funny about this smell and
knowing the background that the wife has disappeared.
Yeah, he couldn't take that chance. So I said, what I think he's done is he's gone back to the house before moving back in with Rosalina, recovered the body, which by that stage had been in the ground for 3 years or so. And I said, what was the only thing we didn't find that the neighbours said they've seen him bury? I said, the 44-gallon drum. I said, what I think's happened, and this is only just my view, it's never ever been proven, this is just my thoughts, that he's lifted up the drum, got the body out of the ground, but in the process of lifting the body up, these small 7 bones have detached and fallen back down in the hole, and he hasn't realised. It'd be different, say, if a femur or, the skull or something fallen off, you'd see it and pick it up. But these small bones, I said, I believe he's just missed it and filled the hole back in, put the body in the drum. Wherever the drum is, we don't know.
Well, quite often when we recover skeletal remains, we're missing the digits because they do fall off and they're small and different, small little bones like that. So I think it's a reasonable hypothesis that you've got there. And
that's all it is. It's to this day, that's all it is.
So you've got that, the bones, we've got the DNA evidence that's saying it's Jean's bones. It's definitely part of her skeleton. Was he interviewed?
He was.
Was he still out on bail from the charge for Rosalina?
No, by that stage he'd been acquitted of Rosalina's murder.
All right, we'll wind it back a bit. Talk us through the trial with Rosalina and what happened there.
Okay, look, all the evidence went through. We believed, and so did the Crown Prosecutor, that we'd painted a very strong circumstantial case. Because obviously there was no direct evidence of him or of the person who killed Rosalina in the act of doing it. So it was a circumstantial case, but we were very confident. But then the jury returned the verdict. The defence was that someone else had got in from the time he left, found Rosalina obviously in the house, stopped her from making any screams or any noises, strangled her on the bed, went out the back into the garage, got the accelerants, splashed it around, put the accelerants back in the garage, came back in, lit it, and got out without anyone seeing them. Anyway, that was basically, in a nutshell, their defence.
Came back with.
And the jury came back obviously thinking, well, is it possible? Obviously someone did get in and he hasn't done it. And so came back with a not guilty verdict.
How did you feel?
Gutted.
You were there in the court at the time?
I just couldn't believe that. As I said earlier in our podcast here, there are cases where I thought, we've got the basic evidence, we've got enough to charge someone, but it could go either way, and we get up on them, and then we've got a case that I believe was solid. And it's sort of like you're thinking, what the hell just happened?
How did it impact on Rosalina's family and friends, that decision?
They couldn't believe it. And the hard part is for us as detectives, when these things happen, is to then try and explain it and make some sort of sense of it to the family where we can't make sense of it ourselves.
Yeah.
And that was difficult.
Was Jean's family following the trial?
Yes.
And they could see the connection?
Yes.
So they would have been pretty gutted as well?
They were. And then, and in my own personal conversations with Jean's mum, Christine, from there, she was worried about Tom getting away with Jean's murder.
Because he hadn't been charged at that stage with Jean's murder. So,
no.
Yeah.
No, so, we had the bones. They just hadn't been formally identified.
And he reacted in a funny way after he was acquitted.
He did. He launched his own media campaign saying that Jean was still alive and he knew where who she'd gone off with, but and he was offering a reward for any further information, and basically, I suppose, mocking the police. Saying we don't know what we're doing and all that sort of thing. So, look, that was a minor distraction we put to the side. And the not guilty verdict for Rosalina only made, well, I only speak for myself, made me even more determined to make sure we got everything done and there was nothing left unturned in Jean's case.
Yeah, well, you'd be highly motivated. And sometimes, you've just got to... I found in my career, and I don't know if you're the same, but there's court decisions that have gone against what I expected, and I walk out and I'll be kicking stones as I'm walking away from the court. But you got to let that go.
You do.
As a policeman or a policewoman, you present the case. That's all. You can just do the best you can do, and here's the evidence that we've gathered. Then it goes through the courts, and then you've just got to accept what happens with the courts.
Exactly right.
But it is a gutting feeling, and you just, how the hell did that happen? But anyway, moving on from there. So the focus now is the investigation into Jean's disappearance. And we've recovered body parts, so we can assume that she has been killed. She's not alive anymore, so that takes that side of it out. When the homicide cops interviewed him, did he participate in an interview about the Jean's matter?
He did, and he still denied that he had anything to do with her murder.
Yep.
He still believes she's alive, and that's basically how the interview went.
And they charged him based on the evidence that they've gathered. Did he get bail refused, or
he did?
So he was in custody.
Yes.
What happened then?
Well, then we went through the committal process. He was committed to stand trial. We went through the trial at the Supreme Court at Darlinghurst. All the evidence was presented. We actually flew the two scientists from America out to Australia to give evidence.
Did your informants give evidence?
Yes, they did. Both of them. We were able to track them down.
Yeah.
And to their credit, they agreed to give evidence. And I'd got a statement. We ended up getting the prison informant to ultimately sign my notebook statement.
Yeah.
He didn't do it on the day that I got it, but he ultimately did. And he was subsequently released from jail and was living up the North Coast. He got a phone call one day out of the blue from Tom's solicitor.
Right, that's a concern.
Yeah.
Is this after the brief's been served?
Yes.
Yep.
Now, wanting to know, is he this particular person, and asking some general questions. Anyway, he denied, said, no, mate, don't know what you're talking about. It's not me. You got the wrong person. Don't ring me again. Anyway, then he rang me straight away at the coroner's court and said, what the hell's going on? This bloke's solicitor's just rung me. I need to get out of here. So we ended up having to get approval to relocate this witness. We offered him witness protection. He said, no, I don't want that. I've got a new life. I've got a new partner, but I want to be moved.
Yeah.
So I had to fly up the North Coast. We were given money to relocate him. That was done. But he was pretty anxious by the fact that Kear's solicitor had made contact with him out of the blue.
Well, I think someone that lives in that world as a prison informant, where you get killed for giving information.
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
correct.
And even if he's out of prison, there's still a long reach. So he was taking a risk, assisting you, and it's good on him for continuing on, because it would have been very easy for him to walk away. Because how many years after he first provided the information was this?
It was around 90, in the early 90s. So I was then at the coroner's court from 94. So it's probably about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. So it's almost, he's got on with his life and he's been dragged back into it.
That's right. And ultimately, as I said, to his credit, he and the other prison informant gave evidence, but this guy was the most critical one.
Yeah.
Because he gave evidence of what he said to Kear and what Kear finally admitted to him in the prison yard that day, and where he'd buried the body. But his one request to me was, he said, when I come down to give my evidence, I'd like you to introduce me to Jean's mother.
Right, okay.
And I said, why is that? He said, I just want to pay my respects.
Yeah.
And so I did. And it was one of those strange or beautiful, however you want to call it. But I introduced him to Christine, and she shook his hand, and I can't recall the exact conversation, but it was along the lines of what happened to your daughter should not have happened, and I'm going to give my evidence.
Little things like that mean a lot to the families, and I'm sure to him too. And that's the thing about homicide investigations. There is so much emotion attached to it. But the trial, you won.
We won. Got a guilty verdict, but there was a retrial granted. And what had happened is, when the judge
sorry, before we go into the retrial, so the jury comes back.
Yep.
Stand up, and we find you guilty.
Yes.
You go, yes, all this work. Look at the family. The family are happy. Everyone's, well, as happy as you can be when someone's been murdered. And I think we need to understand that there's no winners when someone's been murdered. But at least there's been what appears to be justice.
Yes.
Did you go out and celebrate? We
actually went across the road. The family, Cliff and Christine, approached Mick Lyons and myself and said, and Rod Damon and the Neil Tuckman, the homicide guys, and said, I want to buy you guys a beer. So we went across the road to the hotel across the road with the family, and it was just sheer relief, to be honest. And to think that, as you said just a minute ago, all that work you put in to try and get answers for the family. And I know people use the term closure. I don't like that term because there's no closure. I prefer to look at it as our role is to find answers for the family to questions that they have, what happened, and give them those answers, because the matter's never closed. You never forget her.
I've been taken into account by a family when I said closure will get you closure or whatever, and they threw it straight back at me, and I've learnt from there, and you're 100% right that the families don't get the closure, and it offends them when we say we'll give you closure on this because it doesn't work that way.
No, they never forget in this case, Jean still lived on with them in their thoughts and in their hearts, and so there's no closure. Their grief continues on. There's no closure for the police. I still think about it all the time. But it's giving them answers to questions that they have and finding out what actually happened.
So you got that sense of satisfaction. He's been convicted, and you're thinking, okay, well, that's the end of it from that part of it. Because a lot of work goes into a murder trial. I don't think I've ever attended or been involved in a murder trial that hasn't changed me in some way. It's just so intense, the whole thing. So you've got that in the past, you've done your job, and you can get back to your life. But then what happened?
Well, the next part of it is to get the sentencing done, and then that finalises the matter. We then know, okay, well, this is what you've got for what you did. But in the meantime, it was found the defence lodged a appeal in the Court of Criminal Appeal, and they held that the trial judge had made an error when he addressed the jury on how to interpret the DNA evidence, because it's a very convoluted, very confusing.
I'm not even going to try to explain it. You can have a go because you're a prosecutor, but it comes down to statistics. When in the early days of DNA, that became a point of contention in so many court matters, because what are you telling the jury? Like we've said here, we sat there and said, okay, it's been identified as Jean's bones, and you accept that as fait accompli. But that's not that clear, is it? Because then it becomes a statistical data that it's 1 in 6 billion likelihood. And
that's correct.
You try to explain it because I can't.
Look, I'm not even going to attempt to myself now after all these years, but all I can say is that the judge got it around the wrong way.
Yep.
And so a retrial was ordered.
Yeah.
So then we've got to go back to the family and tell them, you now have to relive this nightmare in court again, and track down all the witnesses again. There was one witness we found had in between trials had passed away. So then we had to get the coroner's report to prove that he had since died.
Yep.
That way we were then able
to use his evidence
from the previous trial. Yep. So apart from us as police investigators now having to relive this thing again, imagine what the family's going through. They've gone from a sort of high, having the conviction and finally getting the answers and the decision that they were after, to now back to square one.
And we understand the system as best we can because we've been involved in it, but you can only imagine the anger and frustration that families would feel going, why? How is this occurring? And it's devastating for them.
It is. And trying to explain it, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Because you know the anguish they're going through. We're going through it ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've got to unfortunately go through this process again. So we did. A second trial.
And how long after the first trial was that, roughly?
I think it was a year or two.
Yeah.
I haven't got the dates off the top of my head, but it wasn't that long. The second trial came around, went through the whole lot again. This time the two DNA experts gave evidence via video link.
Yep.
And basically it was the same as the previous trial, the same processes. I was put in the witness box first to introduce the evidence of the bones because the Crown Prosecutor thought it was an important thing to get the bones as a visual impact in front of the jurors from the very beginning. So they were tendered in evidence and then handed around so all the jurors could physically hold the bags and see the bones in front of them. The video evidence of the searches and all that sort of stuff. So all that evidence was put in from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Then I was excused and I'd get recalled later on as needed to give further evidence. So we went through it. We got another guilty verdict.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very quickly. And again, we've gone back up to that.
Okay, so you think it's done and dusted?
Well, second trial, 2 juries, 2 guilty verdicts.
Yep.
Unfortunately, a couple of the jurors, I'm not sure how many, went across the road again after because they've been together for a number of weeks.
Yeah.
So they went and had a couple of drinks. The defence barrister went over as well, saw them, and in having a conversation with the jurors, one of the jurors let it slip that he looked up Tom Kear on the internet and saw that he'd been found not guilty of his second wife's murder.
Yeah.
So the defence barrister straight away lodged another appeal on the basis, we've got a biased jury. So that appeal was granted and we had to go through a third trial.
I'm sitting here shaking my head in disbelief, and I've been through trials that have had starts and not where it's come to the conclusion like you've had, and then come back or on appeals, but the frustration of that, and in this day and age too, even back then. It's so hard. Like the juries aren't allowed to read papers and not allowed to watch the news, but everyone's got access to the internet. And, we put the juries in there. This is just me ranting and raving about my thoughts on the jury system, that I understand the need to protect, but in the same regards, if we charged you, it's so easy to expect the jurors not to at least have a look on who you are on social media. I think we're asking a lot of people, and maybe we've just got to accept that people have got to make their own informed decisions with all the information that's available.
That's correct. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, it's a real sticking point with the law. Anyway, I digress. Getting back to how did you feel then, and how did the family feel?
To me, it was just disbelief. I can't believe it. Like, it's, how are we going to get through another trial? And my first thoughts again went to the family, thinking, "You poor buggers, we're going to have to put you through all this again."
Yeah.
We've already got 2 convictions, and on a stupid point like that, we're going to subject you to the torment of going through this whole process again. And my heart went out to them.
Yeah.
As me personally, it was anger.
Yeah.
I suppose frustration, yes, but I really felt for them.
Yeah. It's horrendous too, because it is such an emotional thing, and hearing the details that they would have heard, and talking about their daughter's bones, and like it's an exhibit, because that's what it is. But that just depersonalise so many things. And I also find with trials, when you get a restart or a retrial, it's potentially advantageous to the defence. Because they can look, okay, well, we missed this point, we'll pick up that point here. It can work both ways, so it's prosecution as well. But, it's concerning. So you've gone to a third trial, and how long were these trials running for? Like, it doesn't get done in a day.
No, they're 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Every day going into the court. The third trial was no different, but except for the fact that it was held before a judge alone, no jury.
Okay.
And I believe... my memory serves me correct, that was a call made by the defence.
Yeah.
I suppose I thought, well, we've been through 2 jurors
we've
and
lost. Okay.
We've lost. We'll take our chances with the judge sitting alone.
Yep.
And fortunately for us, the evidence played out as per the first 2 trials. Nothing really startling came out from the defence. It was pretty much the same, and we got the same decision. And I remember sitting in the courtroom when the judge walked back in, and he had a A4 size bound booklet, and he gave his decision, and he said he'd put his decisions in book form that was bound. He had 7 copies of it, and he went through, in general, his reasons for his decision, but then handed down these copies to the one for the defence, the Crown prosecutor. I think someone in the media got one too, and the Crown prosecutor managed to get 2 copies given to him, and he turned around and gave me one of them, which I still have today.
Okay. And the judge was fairly strong in the sentencing too, and I think there was even reference in the judge's comments about domestic violence, and sometimes it's not looked at as seriously as it should be. Yeah,
that was the judge in the first trial.
Right.
When he came down with his sentencing, and it was that the sentencing day was bizarre in itself, because the defence called a forensic psychiatrist to give evidence about Tom. And as he was giving his evidence on sentencing, I was looking at him thinking, are you actually the defence witness or the Crown witness? Because he was fairly scathing.
He has since been released from prison.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I was doing some research on it, and there was another incident after his release.
Yes, he soon afterwards he found himself back before the Supreme Court, because he started forming a relationship with a woman he met at a beach, and it became of concern with him leaving notes and things. I don't know how that played out, to be honest, but it was brought to the attention of the Crown Solicitor's Office, and they took legal action, and he was put on a further 2-year supervision order.
Right. Okay. Fascinating story. Did you stay in contact with the families?
I did. Jean's mum, Christine, unfortunately passed away a few years ago. I got called by the family. They rang me one day and said, look, we don't know if she's going to make it through the night. She was in the local hospital, Blacktown, and they said, it'd probably mean a lot to her if you were able to go in. So I left work, and she was in intensive care, and I told the staff there who I was and the reason why I was there, and they allowed me in. She wasn't conscious at the time I first got there, but then one of the nurses came around and stirred her. She couldn't speak, she could only sort of mumble, but she looked at me, and I held her hand, and she acknowledged who I was. So I know she recognised me and knew I was there. That was late in the afternoon. She passed away about 10 o'clock or so that night.
Yeah. don't know what to say there other than it just shows why homicide has got to be taken so seriously, like the connection you've made with that family. I think it's pretty telling that on a deathbed, the person's reaching out to speak to you, because you do have an impact on people's lives. So, yeah, full credit to you for seeing this one through and bringing some peace to the family. And I've seen it, and I think, honestly, it comes down to the families just want to know someone cares about their loved one. And it's not just a number. It's not just a statistic. You've got to live and breathe it. And, I know you pay a price for it because you had to give a bit of yourself and, time away from your family. And that, it impacted on you. But if you take something away from your career, what you just described there, I get goosebumps about thinking about, if you've done nothing else in your career, you made a difference to someone's life. So congratulations.
Exactly right.
Yeah. You've... that wasn't the end of your police career. You're in the coroner's court. Are you a prosecutor? And how did you find prosecuting after being a detective? And do you think being a detective helped you be a prosecutor?
It did, because as a prosecutor, you've got to read the briefs, you've got to look at the evidence, find out if there's any deficiencies, what needs to be done, which is no different to a detective investigating a matter and making sure they've got everything that they need evidence-wise. So to me, it was a natural progression, but even a more natural progression for me going to the coroner's court. The flip side of that is you're dealing with death day in, day out. You're seeing every day, you're reviewing briefs of murder scenes, of suicides, of, things like industrial accidents and things. The worst I found was kids' drownings. And you're subjected to those images and reading the statements, because then we'd have to put a report recommendation to the coroner on whether an inquest is required or whether there was sufficient evidence to satisfy the coroner on the manner or circumstances of the death and the identity of the deceased and so forth. So it does take a toll. You're dealing with that. And there's only so much of those sorts of things that you can read about and see. And got to a point in 2000 where I got offered a spot back at the detectives at St Mary's, as it turns out, by Mick Lyons, who was the senior detective there. They had a junior office, young office, and there was a spot available. And
sorry, and just on that, because Mick gets mentioned in this, as a lot of people do in your book and that you're telling now, and I think you made the point that, I'm talking to you as a person involved in the investigation, but it's a team effort all around, isn't it? Yeah,
well, Mick was the senior detective in all this. He was the one that charged Tom with Rosalina's murder, and he worked with me. The two of us worked hand in hand on Jean's matter.
Yeah.
And Mick and I, we've been good mates for a long time, since the mid-'80s. We worked together at Penrith.
He got you back, get the A-team back together?
Yeah, he got me back, convinced me to come back to the detectives. I had a word to my wife and said, look, I think it's time, and the kids are grown up now. They're that much older, and she said, you do what you need to do.
Time to throw yourself back in the fire.
Yeah, so back into it. And it's funny how things come back. You got to be careful what you say, because the first shift back on deck, Mick and I were having a coffee out the back, and he basically said, good to be back. And I said, well, I think I need a good murder or something really that I can get my teeth into to get me back in the swing of things, Mick, after 8 years. And 3 weeks later, as I said, you got to be careful what you wish for. Got called into that murder at St Mary's.
Oh, that's the one where Jaco and I saw you at the... Yeah, and when you say something like that, people would go, what the hell? But and that's that black humour, the dark humour from policing. You go, we need something like that. And we'll put it on record, we don't actually want someone to be murdered, but comments will be made like that. That's how we talk when that's the world that you live in. Exactly right. It's the last thing you want, to be honest, is to, especially after going through the Kear matter, is to be thrust back into another murder. And with the Kear matter, that was how long? 15 years from start to finish when you first? Well, from 88 to
2004, so 16 years.
Yeah. It's a long commitment, isn't it?
So that was still actually playing out at the time that I went back to the detectives at St Mary's.
Yeah.
It was still ongoing. We'd still gone through the trial, and we're going through the retrial process.
Because people often think when you say you've worked on something for 15 years, and they think that's the only thing that you're doing. But you're juggling quite a few things.
That's right.
Did you still have the passion when you went back as a detective?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's not a job that if you're not passionate about it. I often said to young plainclothes officers coming through, I said, you need to put as much effort into your simple investigations as you do into the really more serious things.
Yeah.
So a simple stealing, if you don't put 100% into investigating that and make sure you've got everything, all the evidence right, you're going to lose and you're going to miss something.
Yeah.
It's no different to the real serious one. So put everything into everything you do.
It's good advice, because when it's all said and done too, by the time it gets to murder, it's still the same basic principles. You've got to gather the evidence, make sure you're not missing anything, even for the simple, stealing or break and enter.
Yeah.
And do it properly and carry that through. How long did you last in the detectives back for that stint?
A couple of years, because I got that murder that I was in charge of.
And you got a result with that one?
We got the result with that.
Yep.
2 young blokes were charged with that death.
And that was a young fellow that was bashed on his way home? Is that...
It was actually 2 young blokes that bashed an older fellow. He was very intoxicated, and they just happened to cross paths on his way home. He was actually about to turn right and head down East Street from the main road when they came across him and assaulted him, and he had a massive heart attack at that time as a result. We ended up getting a result there. But it was a couple of years back in the detectives, and then I got promoted to my final rank, senior sergeant, finished my career at Green Valley. Yep.
And they're not the quiet stations that you were working at?
No, I don't think I've ever worked at a quiet station. When you talk about Blacktown, Newtown, Marrickville, Mount Druitt, St Mary's, Penrith, and then Green Valley.
Yeah.
They're not quiet places.
You certainly had some skin in the game.
Exactly right.
And then the coroner's court is, I think, as you described, it's fairly full on.
Yeah.
It eventually caught up with you?
Yeah, it did. And look, in hindsight, I probably knew I was struggling at least 12 months before things came crashing down. I was having nightmares. I'd wake up around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I still do. But back then, I'd wake up. It's like a light switch goes off, and you wake up. Whether you get back to sleep or not's another thing. But the nightmares I had, they were horrific. Generally involved my young girls in scenes that I'd been to. Fatal accidents, train fatalities where you got bits of human bodies scattered all around the place. And my kids would be the victims in...
And that was the dreams you were having. That's pretty heavy.
Yeah. My wife recalled times where I'd sit up, I'd absolutely yell out, scream out, and I'd be sitting, upright in bed. There'd be tears coming down my face, from one of those episodes. There'd be times, so in the middle of winter, I'd wake up and I'd be in a lather of sweat at the time. And I knew my moods at times weren't good. I'd be short with my wife, short with the kids. You just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
If I could take myself off for a couple of weeks and be on a deserted island somewhere, that would have suited me fine.
Yeah.
But you got to get on with your life. So this was all happening a good 12 months, maybe a bit longer. And then one day I was driving to Green Valley Police Station and stopped at a set of lights, and it just all crashed down on top of me. I just didn't want to make that right-hand turn and head down to the state. I just wanted to drive somewhere and just keep on driving and not come back. And I I ended up going to work, and I pulled out a card from a psychologist who used to be a police officer I worked with. And I'd been involved a couple of years earlier in the search for a little girl who went missing, and we ultimately recovered a body from the parents' backyard pool. The pool water was the darkest green. You couldn't see inside the pool. Yeah. The water was that green. And the initial search of the pool didn't locate a body, unfortunately. So she was treated as a possible abductee. But on the second day, I got the guys to go back and re-drag the pool, and one of the special ops guys actually felt something when he was scooping it. And anyway, cut a long story short, we found a body. I got called out to the scene from the detective's office at St Mary's, and we got her to the edge of the pool and to look at her, I can see her now, picture her now, her hair flowing in the water. She was like a little porcelain doll. Yeah. She's only about 3 years old. And I, because of my experience in the coroner's court, I did the formal identification of the body with the parents at the scene, and went through those processes, and did all the coroner's stuff. And the debrief we had, this particular psychologist was there, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever been a part of. The parents were there. I looked around the room. There was a lot of police, the SES, emergency services staff that were all involved, and there was hardly a dry eye in the place. Yeah. Going over what took place, and in hindsight, maybe we should have drained the pool on the first day, things like that. And this psychologist, Mark, he gave me his card. He said, if you ever need to talk. And he said to me at that stage, after the debrief, he said, what the hell are you still doing in this job? It'll kill you. I said, oh, it's all right. Anyway, I pulled out his card at this particular day at Green Valley, and I rang him. I said, mate, I think I need to come and see you. And he said, I'll make an appointment with you first thing tomorrow. He said, half-hour chat. We'll have a chat. Well, that half-hour chat turned into a 2.5-hour chat. And at the end of it, he said, you're not going back to work. Yeah. You've worked your final shift in the police. He said, I can't sign off to the report. It has to be a specialist, a psychiatrist. So I want you to go and see a psychiatrist here in Penrith. And I went and saw him and relayed. I went off sick then, because Mark said, you're not coming back. And he contacted the police station. And I went and saw the psychiatrist, relayed everything, and I actually broke down in his office. And he said the same thing. He said, do you want to survive? Do you want to be a survivor and get through this? Or do you want to end up potentially losing yourself? Yeah. I said, obviously I want to survive. I've got a wife and 3 kids. And he said, right, you're not coming back to work. And that was it. And I remember he likened what I was telling him to symptoms of a Vietnam veteran. Yeah. And I said to him, you're crazy. I said, what those poor people went through over there in the war. I said, how can you even think of comparing me to that? And he said, it's the death. It's all the death that you've seen and been involved in that's triggering all this. That's what it's all about. And your symptoms are classic symptoms of a Vietnam veteran. Yeah. And that was the end of it. But I was lucky that I realised that I needed help, and I sought that help.
Yeah, yeah. And the way that it got to that point, that one breaking point where you felt like you wanted to turn right instead of turning left to the police station. I hear so many people that I've sat down on this podcast with, but friends, the same type of thing. It hits them at some stage. Yeah. And you're the last person that would think you're ever going to fall victim to the post-traumatic stress. Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage, and it's not courage is a funny thing for police. We've grown up in an environment, or we work in an environment where you don't show weakness. You're horrified by something, but you don't show it, and you move on to the next job. So it's hard to put your hand up and go, hey, I need help. So, full credit to you that you did do it, because you wouldn't be any use to anyone if you kept down that path.
No, whether I'll still be here is debatable.
Yeah.
And it's the thing, people look at police and see a uniform, and what they don't understand, or what they've got to understand, is that we've got emotions and we're humans and got feelings just like any normal person.
Yeah.
And we see things that really no other person really would like to see. And we've got to go home to our families and try and switch off or try and deal with that, and still function after seeing all that. It's the same with all emergency services. But with police, ambulance officers, paramedics, they're going to these scenes every day too.
Yeah.
The hardest part for the police is that with the ambulance officers, they go to the scenes and their job's done and they leave and move on to the next one, whereas we deal with the aftermath. Like you're sitting there with parents.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you are. It's not just here and then walk away. You have got the aftermath.
That's right. Like I've been to cot deaths, and you got a young family, maybe their first child, and died for no known reason. And how do you try and comfort them? You know, we're left to try and continue with that and deal with them, deal with the coroner's part of it.
And we're also looking at it with suspicion too.
Yeah.
That's another layer that adds to the cot deaths.
Yeah, that's right. And I come back to a thing that was sent to me some time ago. It's a very true saying, and it's just simply that I wish my mind could forget what my eyes have seen. And it's so true.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So you're out of the police now, and you're enjoying what you're doing? Yeah,
I work at a local council. I look after their rangers and that sort of thing. It's a lot less hectic, different sort of pressures.
Yeah.
But look, I'm glad I got the help I did when I did.
Yeah.
There were times I'd walk around the house while I was waiting to be medically discharged, and I'd just break down. But I'd always find myself looking at pictures of my wife and my kids and thinking that's what got me through, knowing that if I did something stupid to myself, how would that impact upon them?
Yeah.
And my time at the coroner's court, I saw that time and time again with suicides and that, the effect that it would have on the family. And it's not just the mum or dad or brother or sister. It's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
It's all their friends. It's the wider friends and family that they have that are all impacted by a death.
Yeah.
You know, and that's ultimately really what helped get me through.
Yeah. Well, you're lucky because it could have gone either way by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it could have.
But I really appreciate you being so open with it, because I think it gives people an understanding of what this is all about when police say they've had enough, or they hit that wall.
Yeah.
And to put your hand up and own it. And having listened to what you've done in your career, it's not like it's you were a shrinking violet. Yeah, you worked hard, you pushed, and you pay the price. Writing of the book. And your other book, Deadly Paths, there's two books.
Yes.
How has that been process for you? And what because every police officer's got a book in them, or working police officer, true detectives, that type of stuff. What drove you to write this book?
It was the former coroner who presided over the Kear investigations at the time, said to me on a number of occasions, it's such a bizarre case, you need to write a book about this. You were there from the beginning to the end. He said, look, I'll even help you write it.
Yeah.
That's how passionate he was about it. And look, I had a couple of goes at it. I'd write a couple of pages, but I'd read and think, oh, no, this isn't. Yeah. They're not going to read this. It was like a police brief.
Fact sheet.
Yeah, exactly right. And then I got introduced to a woman one day through my daughter, and she convinced me to write the book. She said, there's a reason you need to write this book. You have to work out what that reason is. And I drove home thinking, well, it's a domestic violence murder. That was the reason for it. Now, I thought, if the old cliche, if it helps one person, then it's been worthwhile. So I spent about 3 months writing, hours every night. Sent it out to a few publishers, and they all came back saying this is a bizarre story, but it needs editing. It's very poorly written. Like I'm not a writer. I'm a, you know, as you said, I wrote it like a police brief, like a fact sheet. So I got in touch. I was put in touch with Jason, and he said, "Let me read it, and I'll have a go at editing it." And it went from there.
Well, and it's interesting you say like it because having read the book, and certainly that domestic violence and what we talked about earlier on in the podcast, that you can almost see, and you would have seen it at the coroner's court. I saw it at homicide at crime scenes. You can see that build up, and the inevitable's going to happen, and it's going to end in tragedy if there's not someone stepping in and making a difference. I'm really heartened by the fact that domestic violence seems to be a key thing that the police are looking at the moment, and the way they're dealing with things. Because if you brush it under the carpet, bad things are going to happen. Oh,
definitely. And I've since the book first came out 10 or 11 years ago. 10.5 years ago, I've been contacted by a few women who said that they built up the courage to leave a violent relationship after reading the book because they simply didn't want to end up. They could see the similarities in Jean's matter and didn't want to end up the same as her. And one of those ladies was actually from the UK, made contact with me. And to think that half a dozen or so women that this book has actually impacted and helped is very hard.
How good's that? You know, that's you're making a difference. The other thing that comes out to me in the book is that I'd like to think that if someone picks it up, if they're thinking of joining the police or are in the police, how you can make a difference by throwing a bit of passion with perspective, and making a difference. So, if people read it, they get that message about domestic violence, but also about policing. That police put out there, they live and breathe it, and you can actually make a difference doing that, doing the work that you did. So
you can. It's a massive difference you can make to the lives of the families of victims.
Yeah,
they rely upon you. They look to you to give them the answers and find out what happened and get to the truth of the matter. And if you can do that for them, that means the world to them.
And as demonstrated by someone on their deathbed and the family reaching out to you, that's a beautiful thing that you've given to that family, that they felt that was the way they wanted their mother to say goodbye. So
and look, that was very special to me too. In my own heart, I knew that we had a special relationship out of something that was so tragic. Yeah.
Now, there's just talking up the book and that another interesting aspect that's fallen from this, and it's funny how life takes different paths. A screenwriter's actually interested in the book, and you got something in the wind about that. What's happening there?
Yeah, I got in touch with a screenwriter. We communicated, and he loved the story. And he was interested in putting a pilot episode together. He believes that he's got a view of making it into a TV series over a number of seasons. So he's done the pilot episode, and he's currently, with his agent, in discussions with a large production company to move ahead with that.
Well, good luck to you. That'll be a different pathway as well. So, yeah,
it'll be interesting if that comes off.
Fantastic. I asked this question of most police. Would you recommend people joining the police?
Yeah, look, it's a funny thing. To those people who don't know the police force the way it was back when I was in, they don't know anything different. Yeah, it's a good career. You can really make a difference. And I would always encourage someone, if that's your passion, to make a difference and join the police, then go and do it. Yep. But be prepared to put the work in and do the best you can. Would I rejoin now if given the opportunity? Probably not. It's a whole different job now to what it was when I joined back in 1980.
Yeah. It certainly changed from where we are now.
Yeah. This social media, there's so much more scrutiny, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that it's a job where everyone's, watching. And the thing is, not everything that you see on social media is what it is. Yeah. And that's the problem. Policing's hard enough without having to look over your shoulder all the time to see whether it's like these reality shows where they edit things. Yeah. Things can be edited and not show the true perspective.
Someone can bait a police officer and then the police officer's looking like they're out of control or
exactly right.
Filmed on a phone.
They've got so many more pressures on them these days. Yeah. When I was in the police, it was a whole different era.
Yeah.
So would I join now? Probably not, knowing what I know. Yeah. And that's not to say that I couldn't do the job again. I know mentally I couldn't. Yeah. But I really enjoyed my time in the police.
Yeah.
Back then, we worked hard. We did what we needed to do to get the job done. And as long as you did it the right way, these days, I just see there's so many more influences out there that make it hard.
Yeah, it's a tough gig at the moment, I would suggest.
It is. Legislation's changed. In the old days, we had the Summary Offences Act and all those sorts of things that helped us do our job. Yeah. All those things were taken away, and it's very difficult now. People in the old days, if they told a cop, and said fuck off or whatever, you had provisions and powers there where you could take action. Now, it's just an accepted vocabulary in society, and people can tell the coppers where to go. And I just find there's a total lack of respect for police and ambos and fireys. They cop it as well.
Yeah, you're right. Well, look, Peter, thank you so much for coming on Eye Catch Killers. I've really enjoyed sitting down and talking to you because I miss talking detective shit. And this is sitting down talking with you. I like those real detective stories, and you've articulated it very well. We didn't cross paths as much as we could have in when we were in the cops together. I wish we did team up because I reckon we could have created havoc.
Yeah, we would have had a good time.
We would have had a good time. So thanks very much for coming on to Eye Catch Killers, and all the best for the future.
Thanks a lot, Gary.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.